Purpose of this video is to cover the data transform utility. Fundamentally, the data transform utility does one thing only, and that is to encrypt or decrypt data. It does this by using a policy that defines a rule that explains what the data transform utility or what keys the data transform utility is supposed to use. So let's go in real quick, and we're going to create a new policy. And this policy will have one purpose only, and that is to encrypt or decrypt, or in this case encrypt data. And I'm going to name the policy DX, which is kind of the underlying shorthand that distinguishes data transform. And I am going to use a standard policy, but notice there's a toggle button here for data transformation. So I'll turn that toggle button on, and when I do that, I get this one rule. And I'm going to add one more rule just for clarity. So this policy has two rules. The first rule is about using data transform or rekeying of data and deny everything else. So fundamentally, once this policy is in place, there will be no access to data. So when we use this policy, we need to have exclusive access to the directory structure where the policy is going to be being placed, so no access at all to anything else. And during the data transform, there will be no access to the data. So during the encryption or decryption of data, there will be no access or accessing the files. I'm going to create a key rule. The key rule has a current key, and that's what is the current state of the data. If the data is currently unencrypted, then we'll select the clear key. And then there's another tab here, because this policy has been enabled for data transformation. You'll have a data transformation rule. And in this case, you'll specify the key that you want the data to be encrypted with. Now, in this case, the key doesn't exist because I don't have a standard key or non-LDT key to use. So I'm going to create a new key. And we'll call the key my new AES key, and we'll select that key. Okay, so if you look at the policy, it has two rules. Rule number one is for key operations. The only thing that is a key operation is either the data transform utility, or if this is an LDT policy, this will be for the rekey operation of LDT. And then everything else is denied. The current state of the data, it's in clear text, so we use clear key. And then once we run the utility, we're going to encrypt the data with this new key. And that is all you need for a data transform policy. So that's this policy here. So I'll go back out to my clients. Before I do that, let's quickly take a look at the data. I have a directory here called secret. With some data in it. So nothing specific about this, it's just some data in a directory structure. Now, the data transform utility will have to be run as root, but let's first create that guard point. Select my data transform policy, and then we'll go select my path. Go ahead and create the guard point, and we can refresh a few times to get that guard point to go active. And now the guard point is active, and since this is a non-LDT policy, you'll notice that rekey status is not applicable. we'll go out to the utility. And you see the guard point secret is being protected by this policy. And the type of policy is simply a typical policy. If this was it's either LDT or it's an online policy. All right, so the utility is dataxform, and there's many options that you can add to dataxform. The ones that we are most interested in is the rekey, which basically is go look at the policy and do what the policy says. You can check the status. You can do certain phases. If you do rekey and rekey alone, then it goes through all the process of rekeying the data. There's a scan phase to go look at the data, how much data is there, and prep to doing the actual rekeying of data, including an estimation of how long it thinks it's going to take. You can run a deep scan if you simply want an estimation of how long you think it thinks it's going to take. You can list the files. You can do several things. One of the things that you might want to preserve is the last modified time. So if there's a set of files and you don't want the file's last modified time to change, then you can use this option. If you don't want to be prompted and you want to automate this, like script it, then you can use --NQ for basically suppress any questions. So --rekey --GP for guard point. In this case, the guard point path. And then I'm going to preserve this option on here so I don't change the last modified date of the files as well. Do you really want to continue? I do. And there it found 96 files, and it transformed 96 files, and the process is done. So now we need to go back out to the host, delete the guard point, and the guard points are removed. Now if I go to that directory and I look at the files, you can see that it's basically all garbage, and nothing's really available to see. It's all ciphered data. Now I'm ready to pull in I can then apply a runtime policy, or what I call a runtime policy, which is a policy that defines the security and access that I want to apply to that data. And so that's all there is to running data transform. This is also applicable to a Windows environment. There's still a utility called data transform, exact same options on Windows as there is on Linux and Unix. One useful utility of the data transform utility is to use it to decrypt data. And there's several methods to decrypt data, but I'm going to show you the method for using data transformation. So let's go back out to our CipherTrust Manager, and we have a Windows host. And on this Windows host, we have a guard point on /SQL data. And if you notice, this policy is a LDT policy, because the rekey status is rekeyed and it's enabled. So we know this is the LDT type of environment. So if I wanted to unencrypt that data for some reason, there's a couple ways to do it. I'm going to show you the way of doing it using data transform. So before I move too far, I need to get some information about the status of the transparent encryption in LDT. and some status about the key information. So on the host, I can run a command. I can find some information about the guard point and its current status by running a couple commands. I do need to run this as administrator command prompt, or if I'm on a Linux box, I do need to be root again in a shell window. So run the voradmin command ldt key report and then the guard point path, and I get a report stating, for this guard point, what's the name of the key and what version of the key is in use. In this case, the name of the key is my test key and the version of the key is version 2 of the key. Similarly, I can run this report and it will tell me what the current status of the rekey operation. In this case, rekeyed means there's not a rekey operation in place. Everything is complete. You don't want to try to do a data transform while a rekey is in progress. You need to let that finish before trying to unencrypt or rekey the data. Now, in order to do this, I am going to create a new data transform policy specific for the unencryption of data, but I need exclusive access to the directory structure. To do that, I'm going to have to stop a SQL Server. I could detach the database, or I can stop the SQL Server instance. Either way, that'll prevent SQL Server from interfering in the creation of the guard point. Okay, now I'll go back out to CipherTrust Manager and want to do a couple of things. First thing I want to do is create a clone of the current version of the key. So if I look at my keys and I can see the key by name, and I've indicated I only want the latest version, or I only want to see the latest version, and so I'm interested in the version 2 of the key. If I didn't display the latest version, then I would see multiple keys by that name, one for each of the versions. But so I am interested in the latest. So I'm going to go clone that key. We'll call it my test key -v2. A data transform policy has to have a standard key, not an LDT key. So that's the purpose of cloning the key, the current flavor of the key. Now we're going to go back out to transparent encryption, and we're going to create a policy that uses that key. So we'll call it dx dash. And it is a standard policy, but we turn on the data transformation flag. And let's add another security rule. Again, every data transfer policy will look exactly like that. The only difference is the key rules and the data transformation rules. So what's the current state of the data? The data is currently encrypted with this key, the one we cloned, and represents the current state of the encrypted data. And what do we want the data to look like after data transformation? And the answer is we want the data to be in clear text, so we will use clear key. And so now this is the full summary of the data transfer policy. Again, the rules are always exactly the same for a data transfer policy. And the current state of the data is it is using this key that we cloned from the versioning key, number 2. And this is the output we want to achieve. We want the data to be in clear text. So we'll save that policy. So now we'll go back out to our clients, and we'll unguard the data, or the guard point. Alright, so the guard point is no longer active. Now we're going to create a guard point with our newly created policy. and the guard point goes active, not applicable to LDT. So we now go back out to the host and rerun the exact same data transform command we did earlier. Okay, now the data is unencrypted. And there's another thing we can do here. During the data transform, we create some temporary files. And all that does is it removes those temporary files. And now we remove the guard point. Okay, now the guard point is deleted. We can go back and restart SQL Server. And the data becomes available. And the data is now decrypted.